That's not my song. All right, I think we're good on LinkedIn. I think we're good on Restream, YouTube, Facebook. Hi, welcome to MadGaines, everybody. Happy Wednesday. We're gonna nerd it out over fast food, which I've been trying not to eat lately, John. All right, welcome to MadGaines Live. I'm Cassandra Gaines, and I've got a good group with you guys for you guys here today. I want you guys to be ready. We're going to move fast. We're going to talk about a lot of stuff, and you will have the options to ask questions. So everybody, you want to go around the group. Let's start with Troublemaking Brandon, who's Madtropolis loves and is very familiar with. Would you like to introduce yourself to those who don't know you?
Hi guys, I appreciate everybody tuning in. My name is Brandon Bay. I'm with Traffix. I live in Nashville and opened a facility for them in January. We're headquartered in Milton, Ontario, Canada. Family owned, been in business for 41 plus years. What sets us apart is our people and high performance and innovative solutions to become an extension of our partners. So I appreciate you guys having me on and partaking in this opportunity.
We're excited to have you. And Stan, you're new to Madtropolis. If you would like to introduce yourself.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm Stan Delikat. I have an amazing wife. We have 5 incredible kids. So for the most part, I'm a husband and a dad.
Love
And I
that.
say that because I work for Marten Transport, where that's a priority to our company. And I'm very proud to be there. I started in our industry in '87. Our president, Tim Cole, hired me at JB Hunt. He hired me again in 2001 at Night Transportation, and I was there until about 4 years ago when he made his mistake for the 3rd time and brought me to Marten with him. So very proud to be with
I
our
love
company.
it. I have a feeling we're going to really love your expertise as well. I've already heard good things about you when I announced that you were joining the show. Last but not least is one of our favorite shippers, John. John, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is John Brewer. I'm the Director of Distribution and Logistics for CKE Restaurants. For those of you who don't know those guys, they own the Hardee's and the Carl's Jr. brands. Been here in Spring Hill. Our office is in Franklin, Tennessee. Been here in Spring Hill for about 3 years with my lovely wife, and just glad to be part of the team that spreads the happy.
Yeah. And I'll tell you that every time I've been prepping for this show, I have been craving your hamburgers. They are so good. So we're so excited to have you. So today, Madtropolis, we are going to have a bit of a fast agenda, but toward the end, you'll be able to ask live questions from our top shipper, our broker, and our carrier. The goal of these shows is to give you a crash course and a glimpse into somebody else's world in the freight market. So last week, I think, or the week before, we had pharmaceuticals, we've had flatbed, we've had final mile, and now John, who's appeared on a couple of shows in the past, he intrigued everybody when he started talking about how to deliver to the DCs and the restaurants with regards to food. And it sounds like your world, John, is pretty intense. If you could give us a general idea of your freight mix so that folks who've never worked with you and there will be a lot of folks, and there are a lot of folks who have no idea and have never shipped this food before, this product before either.
We have pretty much 2 components. We have the inbound and obviously the outbound to the stores. The inbound is pretty much truckload, refrigerated. It's probably about 60% of the mix, with some of that being frozen as well. And then the other 30 to 40% is going to be dry, packaging, napkins, plates, cups, what have you. On the outbound side, we have 2 distribution partners, one for each concept. They use their drivers. They do final mile. It's 12 to 15 stop pedal runs on tri-zone temp reefers because we ship dry, refrigerated, and frozen. They have to hand truck those off with a 2-wheeler and put them directly into the store. They put them in the coolers, put them in the freezers, put them in the dry areas. And most of those deliveries, especially on the Carl side, are unattended deliveries. They deliver at night. So the driver has the keys, he has the alarm codes, he goes in, he puts all the product in, locks the place up, sets the alarm, and he's off to his next stop. So it's pretty complex situation. that we deal with.
And very unique. A lot of us who have worked, I've worked for a lot of transportation providers. Most of the time, I'm fluent in, full truckload or final mile of just regular goods. The new piece, I feel like, to your freight is the driver being more involved with the delivery. I think I've only worked with a customer, a shipper who was did a lot of auto parts, and they were allowed to deliver that way as well. But it is unique. I can't wait to talk about it a little bit more. Is all your freight? Do you have full truckload? Is it LTL? Do you use rail, or is most of it delivery to restaurants from your DCs?
It's the inbound products go into our DCs are pretty much truckload. We do some LTL, but not a lot, and most of them are either refrigerated or frozen.
Okay.
The final mile is more of the tri-zone reefers.
That makes sense. And how many providers do you use? Do you do what many shippers do and send out this big RFP and you have lots of providers you have to manage, or do you narrow things down more like some of our shippers who've been on the shows will say they only have one or two providers that manage everything?
Typically prior to CKE, I like to do what I call surgical bids, where I'll specifically target a geographical area or a region or even a specific origin point and just do smaller bids versus a comprehensive, and then just kind of cycle count it around the country. So do all these small bids over a period of time, and ultimately you bidded your business out. This company is a little bit different. They're not as familiar with the like on the retail side, I would call it, as far as bidding goes. They primarily let their vendors or their distributors handle the freight. They brought me on about 3 years ago to change that. So what we've been doing for the last 3 years is we've been looking at our supply chain and where the freight comes from and where it goes to, and then seeing if we can source that out on common carriers such as the Traffix or Marten Transport. We've driven more, cost efficiencies by doing that with eliminating vendor markups. And we've also gotten more control of our goods so that we know when the trucks are actually going to show up. So it's been a slow, arduous process, to say the least. It's one of those Rome wasn't built in a day kind of things, but we're getting there, and every day is a new adventure with a new section of freight. So it's been exciting. It's like painting on blank canvas. So it's really nice.
Yeah, that is nice. I love how complex your area of freight is too. And to those of you who are new to our crash courses, we usually do these on Fridays. But usually I go to the shipper comes to me and says, I want to have a show. I want to show the rest of the freight world how different my freight is and how complex my world can be. And then they actually tell me who their broker and carrier is going to be. So I want to pivot over to Brandon and talk to Brandon. How long have you been working with John, and what makes you so different? Because all your competitors are out there like, well, this guy's an asshole. I can do his freight, no problem. But you know what would be a good idea? Unmuting. You guys know I'm gonna give him crap all day, right?
I definitely deserve it. That's a great question. So, John and I met probably close to a year ago. We were both involved in the Nashville Transportation Club, and we started working on that together and just building a relationship. And in fact, there's a time, and I've told John about this, that we were sitting him before a board meeting, and he said that he had some California fires, and I said, "Is that your area?" And he said, "It all is." And I said, "Oh, I didn't know that." And he's like, "That's what I love about you," because we started building a relationship, and there was nothing behind it, and it's kind of evolved into John mentoring me in a lot of ways, and the ability to work together just comes from that strong foundation. He's not necessarily looking at other aspects. It's just that we have a relationship, and we've built that over time. And I think that's kind of what sets me apart from my competitors, is that the relationship piece of it, the long-term goal. It's not short-term.
Yeah. And we've talked about that a lot, Brandon, and you've helped us with those discussions as well. I know that people like to say that in these big ideological sense, but it really is what things come down to. Stan, how about you? How long have you been working with John? And your competitors are all looking at you too, giving you the same glare, probably.
Probably.
Right.
So John and I have an interesting little story. We've been friends for about 15 and a half years. It didn't start off that way. So I was working for my previous employer, and John was working for a 3PL, and I arrived, we were going to grab a bite to eat. And John, you want to jump in there for a second, or do you want me to just keep going?
You can keep going.
Okay, well, so when I arrived, John said, I'm taking you off all these lanes, started complaining about service, gave me all sorts of grief. And I probably did something he didn't expect. I said, you can't fire us. And he looked at me, he's like, he was stunned. And I said, you didn't give me probation. And he was working for a truck parts manufacturer. And I said, and besides, all of those parts are in our trucks. And as far as I'm concerned, you need to give me 30 days. And we went back and forth for a minute, and it wasn't entirely pleasant. And then we agreed that I'd get my 30 days. And I said, we can go to lunch, but under one condition. He said, what's that? I said, we don't talk about any of this. We don't talk about, I named the company I work for. We don't talk about your company. We just go to lunch and we talk about family and whatever else, but none of that. He said, deal. And then on the way out of the building, John, you want to chime in? Because you stopped us on the way out of the building that day.
Yeah, I was sitting there, Cassandra, just so you know, in the back of my mind, I knew I had lunch scheduled with Stan. And I was like, I don't even want to go to lunch with this guy. I don't want to see this guy no more. I don't want to do anything. I'm done. But when he made the compromise, I said, that'll work. I can handle that. And as we were walking out the door, I looked at him and I told him, I said, look, I said, I don't necessarily agree with your point of view on this, but I respect any man who fights for his company, and I do that. And we went to lunch, had a great conversation, and I think we've got a pretty unique relationship because we can run stuff past each other, and neither one of us is going to blow smoke up our ass. We're going to shoot it straight, and if it sucks, it sucks. So.
And what John doesn't know is one reason I went to lunch is I was hungry. So. I'm kidding. I am blessed to have John as a friend, and we talk about a lot of things other than just transportation. So I do consider him a good friend.
So everybody's going to ask this question. I can.
Oh.
It's about to pop up in the feed. There's a little bit of a delay, but it'll pop up. Which is, what did you do to improve? Because we've all been there, where somebody is not happy with our services, and luckily they're real enough to come out and say it. Many times they just phase us out slowly. We don't even know until it's too late.
So I worked in a different environment, and I wouldn't do this again. Okay. I've learned a lot over the last 15 years, and I would not replicate this thing. But I went back to my operations person who worked for me, and I said, I don't care if you have a truck, a convoy, a truck in front and a truck in behind it. For the next 30 days, we will not miss a load. We won't miss it for weather. We won't miss it for mechanical. We won't miss it for any reason. And I don't mean in terms of putting the driver at risk for weather related, but that operations person didn't have the attention to detail that I had expected. And I said, if we don't, you may not be here on day 31, or you certainly won't be in that job. And I've never said that before, and I would never say it again. Certainly have no reason to ever say that at Marten, because it truly is a family environment. So I'm not proud of that, but we went 100 and some odd days without missing a load. So it was certainly possible. We just needed to pay closer attention. And I'm not proud of that, but ultimately it turned into a very large dedicated opportunity for my previous employer that's been ongoing for 15 years or 12 years or so.
People are going to love you with that story, by the way. John, what are some of your KPIs that, if you feel comfortable, or you can speak in general terms too, like with other employers, but what do you expect from your providers when it comes to performance?
From a KPI standpoint, obviously, on-time delivery, obviously, got to keep the claims down. You don't want to damage the goods. But I think if you dig a little bit deeper than that, we were discussing this last night on a little Zoom mini happy hour we had, and I brought up ease of doing business. It's easy to get a load booked. It's easy to get somebody on the phone. You're not dealing with several different reps for several different divisions. it's easy to get a freight claim paid if it's legit. All these things kind of roll up into one, because to your point earlier, I run a pretty complex operation, and there's a lot of squirrels running around at all times. And I just don't have a lot of time. Time is a very valuable commodity with me. And if I have to kind of handhold a carrier partner or a broker partner and babysit them the whole time, then I got to find something else. I've got to have somebody who can run their own stuff and take care of things. The other piece of it is, and Brandon brought this up last night, and it's just uber critical, is communicate. If something's going south out there, tell me, call me, tell me before my customer does, and then bring me a solution that you're going to implement to get it fixed, so that I can call them up and say, hey, look, your shipment's going to be late, but here's what we're doing, and here's when it's going to be there. And that puts out a lot of fires very, very quickly. And it's that proactive stance of doing business and being able to have those, to the points earlier, have those relationships and that trust built, that you can pick up the phone and call me and say, hey, this is messed up, and I'm not going to just hand you your head. I want to work with you on it. In fact, if you don't call me and my customer calls me, then I am going to hand you your head, because that should have never happened.
And are your customers the franchisees or the restaurants? Is that, or
Yeah.
you're talking about internal?
Yes.
So you have accountability
Yes.
to them as well, which is stressful,
I'm
sure.
I have a lot of bosses. I have a lot of customers. We'll say that.
And so Brandon, what's the goal let's start with on-time performance. How can you manage as a broker when you're not supposed to be too much controlling, but how do you select your providers and then help with on-time performance, especially with regards to the fact that the carriers in many of these locations have to unload themselves?
Yeah, so we talked about relationships that John and I have, and Stan and I met last night, that we build on that side. But in my world, it's on both sides, having that relationship with your partners, the carrier partners, because we're in this together when we're performing, or delivering goods for companies like John. But you have to have a good relationship with your carrier partners. You have to communicate with them in the same return that they communicate with us. And there's a lot of tracking technology that's out there right now, which makes it easier. But on-time performance is critical for us just as much as it is Stan, or we are held accountable in the same way from those KPIs, and we take it seriously. And it's just locking down capacity, having those relationships, and making sure that we're providing good service to our carriers and our shipper partners as well.
Makes sense. So how many of the carriers do you use that are core relationship carriers, and then how many are there you've newly sourced from maybe the spot market? It's because you have an influx and your core carriers are taken up, especially right now?
So numbers wise, I don't have a good number if you're talking about
just a feel for it.
But our goal, when we participate and we are in business, is to work with our carrier partners and provide capacity. It's never our goal to live out on the load boards, to post and pray. We really genuinely try to partner up with our carriers that are going to do a good job, and lock those down and schedule A's and give them the same terms from the shippers. Now, where we can excel is if something happens with those partners, we're going to have the ability to recover. And that might be a time where we do have to go outside of our normal resources to get that done. But, that's kind of the way we look at it from that view of choosing carriers. I mean, we really take our time and try to get good partners, so we don't have those claims, right, John?
That's right.
And what's interesting is I'm trying to imagine myself a broker and sourcing a carrier who can deliver into these restaurants for John's Freight. And I'm thinking, damn, that just narrowed the market so much. Because how many carriers, this is a dumb question, Brandon, because I'm just a dumb lawyer. How many of these carriers will go in and deliver or are okay with that?
So it's a great question. Again, there's no number to put on it, but just like any vertical that you're in, there are carriers and drivers that really excel in that market. some drivers want 1 and 1, some want long haul, some want 1 and 3, some don't mind the 1 and 15s. They get out, they stretch, they exercise, it keeps them busy. So to put a number on that, I really couldn't quantify that, but there is a niche market for that just as much as there is those 1 and 1 easy loads. You just have to find those good partners and be willing to work with them and know that they're going to do a good job for you.
Okay, so Stan, when with these carriers, first of all, do you have your own final mile
We don't.
fleet?
We don't. So we do have about 1,570 dedicated trucks in 42 fleets. We're not doing anything final mile. We're not doing unattended delivery today. We're not opposed to it, but there are some liability concerns and some complexities that just don't make it incredibly attractive to us. So it's got to be the right origin. It's got to be the right store mix, so there's got to be a lot that makes it attractive. But for the most part, it's just not what we do.
So you're doing most of the full truckload to DCs?
Well, on fast food, I joked with the guys last night that I've got 5 kids, so my expertise is bringing it home, not taking to the store. So, hey, thanks for laughing. But thanks for continuing to laugh. So, no, we're primarily DC to store, and on the dedicated side, and on the non-dedicated, on the inbound side, it's vendor to DC in a lot of cases. And since we're primarily temp control, there's a good mix of products, from produce to frozen.
So I see. So not all deliveries to stores are final mile box truck.
Not in the scenario that John has, not where we're going into doing an unattended delivery, or it's maybe lift gate and wheeling it into the back of a restaurant in their case. What I'm referring to is more a retail store. We do a lot of work for a large general retailer, and you could consider it final mile, but I just consider it store delivery.
Okay, makes sense. John, what kind of equipment requirements do you have? Do you get into the nitty gritty like that, or do you depend on like Brandon and Stan to deal with those types of details?
We deal with it at kind of a high level. We will, obviously, it needs to be food grade because we are transporting food. You can't, haul toxic waste the load before. That's not going to work. So that plays into it. From the refrigerated side, we've got specific temps that we have to maintain our products at. So you have to be able to do that and maintain that. We actually use, I think there was a question online about how we track temps throughout the run of the load. We do use PIM monitors, temp tails,
okay,
and you can download those at the receiver, and it'll give you the entire history of what those temps were throughout the entire run. And we have very strict quality requirements that if that temp goes out of scope or out of spec, then we will refuse the load because we're serving food, and it's, obviously it's food. You don't mess with food.
Yeah.
So we have very strict guidelines when it comes to that.
It's interesting because often I will talk to brokers or carriers in our industry, and they kind of, what was the quote from James Reed's interview? He said, "You call, we haul." And that wasn't his motto. He was saying that people shouldn't have that motto, but some do. And I know Brandon knows exactly what I'm talking about. He doesn't do it, but we know who does. And but I know there are going to be brokers and carriers out there that'd be like, "No problem, I haul food, whatever. Just tell me what temperature it needs to be. I'll go find it, and it'll be all good." And then they end up with a disaster because they don't realize that there's so much that goes into transporting food. And at the end of the day, the carrier is responsible often if the load gets rejected or all food freight. So it's always interesting. Like, so John, when people try to tell you that they can run your freight no problem, where can you identify who, when they're talking to you, can you identify, like, I don't think you know what you're talking about. I don't think you have ever run food before.
Typically what I will do, and this is just my personal preference, is, we'll seek out references from the carrier, from the customers they haul from. Typically, when I sit down with a carrier or broker, they'll put their customers' logos up on a slide. And if you see some of the bigger players out there, you know, you can check with them and say, hey, I'd like to call this company and see how they're doing, see what they think. And typically, I mean, if you can do that, you know, if they're hauling for a large major food producer, then typically we're going to be okay. But you definitely need to check your references. You need to do your background checks, make sure everything's good, because like I said, you're dealing with food, and the safety and security aspect of that commodity is paramount.
Yeah. Brandon, how important is it to communicate everything to these carriers? And also, are there a lot of instructions with regards to the delivery portion as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it starts with, you know, the compliance team, you know, depending on the commodity, you know, how new is the reefer unit? You know, are we partnering with those units that can give you instant downloads? Can we have visibility on the temperature trailer? And then obviously, you know, whenever you partner, it's going over those details with our carrier partners just as much as someone like John's going to go over details with myself. You know, there are things put in place to ensure that all of those check marks get checked. But at the end of the day, you know, you want to partner with carriers that know what they're doing, that you know, are going to do those right things for you, and that are going to, you know, perform and do all the little things that you know, make partnering up good for everybody involved.
Yeah, makes sense. I'm going to pivot a little bit. So Stan, with regards to, you're actually a perfect carrier to discuss this with. With regards to the technology that you need and the equipment, how difficult is it to run this freight? Are you guys very fluent in this and you do it a lot? And what would a new carrier need to know who's perhaps leasing a reefer unit and thinking about getting into the market?
Well,
I know, I loaded you up.
you sure did. Well, there's a lot of liability, right? Depending on the product value. So we have, and I know we're not supposed to do an infomercial for Marten, but we have.
I asked.
Yeah. So we have new equipment for the most part. And so we've limited our risk by having equipment that we can rely on. We only hire professional drivers. So we limit our risk again by having folks that have committed to being, you know, professional drivers. And so with regards to technology, all the telemetrics that John mentioned, but they're built into the trailer, and we're using our proprietary system to coordinate the information and get it back to our customer as needed. So, and we've got a special group at our corporate office that literally is just monitoring the temperature of our trailers.
Yes, I like
so
that.
Just to make sure that even with all those checks and balances, we've got eyes on it. So we're not just relying, we've got great systems, but we've got eyes doing it as well.
Yeah. So let's step out of, you've got the money, you've got the company, but we do have a lot of new people that tend to listen to the show as well. I will tell you, the majority of Madtropolis are really intense freight nerds. We are super curious about everything. That's why Brandon keeps coming back and John keeps coming back, because they keep educating us on their world. None of us are going to go out there and just run some freaking food and think we know what we're doing. But it's sometimes we feel we get newer owner operators who've leased equipment. What's your advice to them if they say, I want to run this freight and I've got this really expensive equipment? What's the first mistake you think I'm going to make?
Well, Brandon, don't get mad at me. I was looking at your background and it shows 3 trucks that haven't moved since we started 30 some odd minutes ago. And so it feels like that's a great place to start right now, because that almost looks like a food service distributor, because a lot of the larger ones are just very inefficient. And so it wouldn't be abnormal for 3 trucks to sit there indefinitely for 4, 6, 8 hours. And I think that smaller carriers end up with those opportunities. Larger carriers have been there, done that, and they either identified specific locations where it's just very inconsistent or just inefficient, period, and they choose not to go. And I think somebody new to our industry, it's low-hanging fruit, it's an opportunity, and they assume that that's the way a lot of places are, but relative to other types of freight, the food service, the large distributors are very challenging.
Makes sense. John, so I'm going to try not to put you on the spot, even though you're on the spot. What's the tipping point when you when you have a CFO, and let's use an imaginary, let's take you out because you have a lot of experience beyond just your company you're working for now. But CFOs often come
Right.
down on shippers. And I'm not saying this happened to you now, but in this imaginary situation, they come down on shippers and they want shippers to reduce, they want their transportation department to reduce their costs. And they come down
I,
on them
I
hard.
I was so hoping you would ask this question. I have been thinking about this probably weeks. We get I listen to your show all the time and huge fan, obviously.
Thank you.
Um, but we hear, go out, pound the rates, pound the
Yes.
carriers, get the rates down, pick the cheapest carrier, all this stuff. And I'm like, that's I'm sorry, but that's the easy way out. Okay. There's different things I've been in the industry over 25 years, jack of all trades, master of none, obviously. And the thing that there's things you can do without ever having to reduce your carrier's rates. And let me explain, because I really was thinking about this, and I'm like, okay, say the bulk of what you ship is small parcel. Well, you can look into zone skipping. There are plenty of vendors out there, partners who are very well versed at this. If moving down to LTL, if you do a lot of LTL, do some pull point distribution, do hub and spoke, run your line haul carrier to the DC and spoke it out as local deliveries. If you do truckload, the last company I worked for, we had a lot of truckload volume. We switched it to intermodal and just shipped it out of the DC a day earlier than normal. You can also work with companies such as Brandon's and Stan's and dovetail into what's their backhaul. Where do they need backhauls at? Can your freight match up with those backhauls? So there's a lot of different ways of doing this before you ever even get to a bid. Now, I'm not saying don't be competitive with your bid. Do your market test. Do your research. I'm not saying don't bid. I'm just saying that there's a ton of things, a ton of tools in your toolbox that you can use if you'll just dig a little deeper, and you can deliver those results to your CFO and keep him off your back.
So the hard thing about that is that your company has you and you have so much experience. But we have so many shippers that watch the show who have only been with that company or they're tossed into there and they don't even know half the stuff you just said. Um, where can they start if you were advising shippers who, by the way, it's really hard to network. And they're often working for a company that doesn't understand transportation either. And if you don't know the answer, it's okay. But I was just curious where you start with being able to understand how to
I
be creative with those solutions, because that's hard stuff. That's pretty intense stuff right there.
Well, let me kind of build you just a little bit of a clock. First of all, uh, everything I know about this industry, I learned in this industry. Okay. I did have the privilege of having not one mentor in my career, but two. And those gentlemen taught me more than they've forgotten more about logistics and distribution than I'll ever remember or glean going down the road. I would tell you that it this industry is a lot of, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And building those relationships, such as with Stan, such as with Brandon, but also with other people in the network. That way, you can learn. There's always somebody out there that's willing to teach. I was lucky enough. I've been doing that for some folks out on LinkedIn. I would say, not plug LinkedIn at all, but that it is a good professional network, and you can definitely reach out and find people that are in those industries that you're talking about, like zone skipping on the small parcel. There are literally companies out there, that's their bread and butter. That's what they do. You just need to reach out to them and build your network, then build the relationship, and then say, hey, here's what I've got. Is there anything you can do with me? On a side note, just so you know, another thing that when it comes to selecting a provider, if that provider can work with you and partner with you, because you're in my line of work, I'm in a state of continuous improvement. I've got to improve my service. I've got to improve my cost. It never changes. So if I've got a partner out there, whether it be a truckload carrier, a broker, a small parcel consolidator, LTL pool distributor, doesn't matter. If they're coming to my office and they're sitting down and saying, hey, we've got an idea. What do you think about this? And doing a collaborative project, that speaks volumes to me, because you're trying to help me, and ultimately it'll help your company. And I used the phrase last night, and I'm going to share it with you. When I met Stan, I was working for basically a 3PL on site at a customer. And one of the first things my boss told me when I got there, because we had a 3-year contract, and once your 3 years is up, if they don't renew, you're gone, is it's easier to cut off a finger than an arm. So you want to be the arm. So any vendor out there that's working with me collaboratively and helping me, get better at what I'm doing and help them get better at what they're doing, then they're going to be an arm. They're not going to be a finger.
It's so interesting when you say that, because we had Shelley Simpson on a few weeks ago, and she had said that that's her most desirable contract, is the long-term contracts where they can become solutions for their customers. But then it's interesting because we have such diverse shippers that will come on the show, and some of them will say, that's great. You just offered me all these solutions and this huge package of how you're going to save money and profit sharing and rebates, but we just want you to run this freight cheap and go away. So it's so interesting to hear the diverse input from different people. Brandon, in a way, you're a shipper, and so what is your advice to brokers who sit in your seat and their customers are coming down on them saying, cheap, I want the rates low, I want you to hurry up, get your KPIs in order, and especially with something like John's Freight. I'm not saying John would ever do this, but it's something like John's Freight where it's expensive. The freight's not expensive. It's the trucks and food, and there's investment that goes into it. So the cheaper you go with this freight, sourcing this freight, the more problems you probably have. Does all that make sense, Brandon, or am I just bad?
No, it does. So a couple parts to that. One, in my position, it's qualifying the shipper just as much. A lot of people, and we've talked about it in MadGaines before, they want to dial. I'll give you the cheapest rate. But if you take a different approach of building a relationship and qualifying a shipper just as much as they're qualifying you, it's okay if it's not a good fit. You still establish a relationship. And as part of that relationship, if you do move and there's, market trends that go up and down, it's about being proactive and communicating. If the market's dropping and you see that and you have the opportunity to go to your partner and say, hey, the market's really changed. I know that this rate's been really high. So say back in 2018, when there were outrageous rates that were locked down, when it dipped, having that proactive conversation before they have to come to you, letting them know that that's going on and that you want to talk about, re-rating due to the market, building a relationship. They say greedy pigs get slaughtered, hungry pigs get fed. So when you have that relationship and you're being proactive, I think that goes a long ways.
Stan, I'm going to throw a not nice question at you. And if you don't have the answer, just be like, I don't know, Cassandra, whatever. I did this to James Reed, and he told me that I should go ask a rabbi. But in a way, the more all of us at Madtropolis are getting fluent with each other's segment of the transportation industry, the more I think we're starting to realize why our industry is so volatile. The rates, the capacity, literally in 30 frickin' days, we're almost seeing a complete 360 with our industry. It blows my mind. And I think, like, shippers like to sorry, John, shippers like to complain. I'm not saying John does this. I've never even heard him complain about this. They like to complain to the truckers and the brokers saying, you're all over the place. Your capacity and your rates are up and down, up and down. It's exhausting. But it's interesting because they actually I spin this around on a question. Do you think they play a major role in that velocity?
Oh, do they ever? Yeah. Oh, you. Okay. Yeah, you set me up. Great job.
Sorry.
Yeah, they certainly do.
You have a lot of experience in our industry. I'm gonna get all that from you.
There are not enough people like John who have the confidence to go to their CFO and explain the difference between the cheapest and the best solution. And that therein lies the problem. So what happens is they gravitate to the lowest cost. They don't work on their own problems. Okay, and I'm speaking in general terms. There are a lot of good shippers out there, but then, there are a lot that have a lot of room for improvement. They don't fix their inefficiencies. They're not terribly concerned about how long it takes when you get to their location before they're loading you or unloading you. They find all sorts of creative ways to circumvent the agreement. And over time, those folks end up not being, the preferred customer of a lot of larger carriers. And so until something dramatically changes, we steer clear of folks that have developed that kind of reputation. And I know that my counterparts in the industry do that as well.
They do.
So
it's not the first time we've heard this in MadTropolis. And it's interesting because the shippers who are more like that, and by the way, it's not just shippers, it's carriers and brokers too that are fly by the night and they play into this volatile market. They're not on the show. They're certainly not watching it. And not following any of this stuff as well. So any of you out there who are like, yes, am I one of them? No, you're not. If you're here already educating yourself, you're not one of them. We're not talking about you.
They're ultimately raising their own costs.
Yeah, it's a short-term mentality that costs them money in the future.
And they're driving drivers out of our industry, which is maybe the most important piece of all of that. Folks that would like to earn a living driving a truck, try it and then realize it's a lot more difficult than they expect. They're not what they deserve, and they're sitting all the time when they should be moving. So anyway, I'm on my soapbox now, but
Brandon, I heard you trying to say something.
Sorry.
Well, we were just talking about the shippers that try to circumvent contracts, the carriers that don't pick up on time and have claims. And in MadTropolis, I think I've used this term quite a bit, and I'm going to get a good laugh. But we refer to those on both sides as bottom feeders. Right.
Yep,
and that's from the shipper side, the carrier side, and the broker side. And obviously John, Stan, myself, and even MadTropolis, we want long-term relationships even within this networking opportunity. And but that bottom feeder term can go all ways. It's not pointed at any certain vertical or direction.
Well said, very well said. And the reason also why he's always on the show. So one more question for John, and then we're going to go to questions and answers because this was such a good discussion. I haven't been paying attention, and I can see that people have a lot of questions. But John, I'm going to put you on the spot now, and you don't have to answer. This is going to be an imaginary scenario, not your current employer. But and just as background, the viewers of MadTropolis have the percentage of the views that are shippers is growing more and more and more every day. And I'm realizing that it's because they don't have a resource. And they're in these companies where no one understands transportation. Have you ever, or actually, what is your advice to a shipper, somebody who's in a similar role to yours, and they are getting a lot of heat and a lot of pressure about finances, and they just don't know how quite to professionally articulate what happens when we remove our partnerships, our providers who already have great partnerships, and we go with the cheap version. Have you ever had to have that discussion, or are you the amazing John and everyone is okay?
Unfortunately, more times than I care to count. I think there's a two-part thing there. I think number one of the challenges I've had to do my entire career is educate internally, senior leadership, people in my own department, people outside my department, of how the whole transportation logistics kind of distribution thing works, and it's almost like teaching them. You have to educate them, and you have to explain to them, and you really got to know your audience, because unlike all the freight nerds here at MadTropolis, most of us are just sucking this up and just going, zone skipping, well, Joe Blow CFO may not know zone skipping from a hole in the ground. So that burden is upon you to internally sell from a project standpoint and what have you. The second piece of it is, and I've had former bosses actually tell me this, former directors of logistics and distribution tell me this, the cheapest rate is not always the cheapest rate. And I think that kind of dovetails a little bit to what Stan was talking about. You may say you save, $100 on a load, but you have to babysit the load. You've got soft cost in there, mainly labor, where somebody has to babysit this thing. Well, it may cost you $200 to babysit this load from birth to death, and you're in the hole $100, but you're never going to see that difference because it's a soft cost. It's not one that anybody quantifies. So you have to explain that to them and say, look, again, I'm going back to time as my most precious commodity, and I don't have the time, nor do I think it's a good investment on the company's part for me to sit around and babysit loads.
Yep.
I am, my big bang for the buck is more strategic, more kind of what the project wise I mentioned earlier, is to find those efficiencies and drive them through the supply chain. And that's where you're going to get your ROI with me. Because let's face it, you're not, you're spending money from my expertise, and you obviously want those expertise to benefit your company. And it's not going to be done if I'm babysitting a truckload.
That is so well said. And I will tell you that one time when I had to demonstrate soft costs, because we all have, a lot of us in different parts of this industry have to demonstrate the cost of soft, the inefficiencies of labor, right? One time, this is horrible, you guys. This was years and years ago, so don't judge me. I needed to demonstrate to a CFO how much and how inefficient my team was. So I had my entire team go on to this app, and all day long they had to track their time. And then I ran analytics and said, look how much time they're wasting doing this, this, and this. It worked. My team hated me for it, but it worked. I was able to do that. But that was the only thing I could think of to demonstrate how inefficient everything is. So I feel your pain for sure. Give me 1 second. And I don't know, Brandon, if you saw any questions you wanted to answer, Stan or anybody, but I need to definitely take a peek at our questions and answers. So I have Matthew Fink is one of my favorite people in Madtropolis. So he says, lightning round question for each expert. Ooh, I haven't read this yet. There's been a lot of volatility this year, seems more than normal. What was the one thing you needed to prepare for or improve for the rest of the year to close out the next 2 quarters? If you could get one thing to improve to call it a successful year, what would it be? Damn, good question, Matthew Fink. Good question. Does anybody want to take this first?
I'm not scared.
All right, Brandon. I love that Stan just did the give it to Brandon.
Yeah, I think this year obviously has been more challenging than ever in our industry due to obviously the pandemic. I think that there's a lot of positive that's come out of this, such as what we're doing right now. But I think for myself and my team and my customer base was just really honing in on making sure that they knew that we were their partner. That when it was the market was up and down and going back up, that
Damn
we
right,
weren't out,
Brandon.
yeah, we weren't out there just trying to gouge our partners on the carrier side or on the shipper side. And I think it's just that communication. When they're home with their kids, are you calling them? Are you asking, watching their grandkids or their kids today? Or when you're doing a call, are you meeting their children, their dogs? And I think it's that relationship and getting to know them in these times more so than ever has kind of been the key to success. Now, obviously, we're seeing states open back up and things come out of this, and we're seeing that in the market with the tender volume. And I think having that solid foundation is going to take us through the next 2 quarters. It's hard for me to say exactly what that entails because I don't think any of us really know. But we just try to really, really do a good job of communicating, like I said, and performing. And really be an extension of their business and not letting them do check calls like John. No one wants to check on those. So, we make sure we communicate that for them.
Well said. And for those of you who are new to Madtropolis, right? About 45 days ago, I think, Brandon was on, maybe it was earlier than that. It's been a couple times. Brandon was on, and we did ask Brandon, how do we handle this volatility. What do we do? And he did say, stay core to your carriers for those who are brokers, and hang on to them and represent them when rates are very low. Don't be an asshole, because the tables will churn, and sure as shit, the tables will churn. But Brandon's been ready for it. So this isn't a prop Brandon up day. This is me trying to find smart people and put them in front of you guys so you can learn from them, because he's right. And Stan, what are your thoughts about all this? You clearly have gone through being a carrier, being closer to the rates sometimes.
Oh.
I'm sure you're pretty tuned into all this.
So this feels, a friend of mine, Wade Rubin, he's president of Marten Dedicated. He says this is like March 114th, right? So it's we all got a timeout of sorts. And so when it happened, Wade and I kind of huddled up, and once we got over the shock of nobody's going anywhere and we don't know what tomorrow looks like, okay, we started with the 52 card pickup on fleets that needed more capacity immediately overnight, and others that were shut down immediately. And so once all of that, chaos was over, we made a list of the things that we wish we had taken care of over the last few years, the things that we had never devoted enough time to, the things that would move the needle when we can't move the needle in the traditional way. And so we've been knocking them off. And so it's not an infomercial, but literally we saw backhaul as a huge opportunity for us. And we're trending at about 17% year over year through a pandemic over last year's great numbers. And so we found ways to use our time in an enjoyable way, a productive way. So I'm really proud of that.
Yeah, you should be.
So,
that's really smart.
I'm hoping the world gets somewhat back to normal. So now we can get back to doing it the way we had been doing it. But I don't know that we would ever return to what was normal before. We'd still probably slow down periodically to do the things that we should have been doing all along the way. I don't know if that was clear.
No, that was very well said too. I think we're all kind of reflecting and thinking the same thing. John, what's your thing for the rest of the year that you're ready for, or you're working toward?
It's been really interesting. Like I said, my tenure in this industry, I've always found logistics and distribution to be pretty agile, pretty nimble with any given situation. They seem to jump back pretty quick and adjust and overcome. The one thing I've had to learn is more the procurement piece, mainly on the commodity side. I've gotten kind of exposed to that by default. And manufacturing just doesn't seem to be as nimble or agile as distribution and logistics. So I would say the thing that we need to look forward to is partnering more with our manufacturing vendors and trying to figure out how to get those guys back up to speed relatively quickly, because especially in the market I'm in right now, everybody's going through a drive-through to buy the family meals for the kids and the stuff. And we've done pretty well during the pandemic because of that. It's just our supply needs to be more nimble and more agile and able to kind of move with the punches, if you will.
John, why do you think there is, or is this Cassandra making this up in her head? She just isn't experienced enough. Why do you think there is such a big gap between manufacturing, transportation, and when people talk about supply chain, one or the other tends to be left out, if that makes sense?
Well, in my past experience, it's always been logistics. We were the last guys to know anything, and it's like, oh yeah, by the way, you got to ship all this tomorrow. And
Brandon's laughing.
We were the afterthought. We're like the oh crap moment. We forgot to tell the transportation guys. The other side of it is, from the manufacturing piece outside of that is, I'm kind of learning more the purchasing side of it. And, that's something I really wasn't involved in per se. I mean, I purchased services, purchase trucks to get stuff moved, but not the widgets themselves. I just moved the widgets. And so I'm starting to see that, that now, the logistics and distribution people, and I've actually tried to use this throughout my career, we can be a benefit to manufacturing. We can transportation, logistics, and distribution can do things to assist manufacturing in being seamless to their customers, if something goes south. We just need to be involved in the conversation, because there's a lot of things we can do. And a really uber simple example, the parts distributor that Stan was mentioning, we were having the receiving guys were getting LTL shipments in, and they were pooling them, and they wanted a live at the time they were a live unload. Well, the guy had to stop his receiving crew, had to go over and live unload it, because LTL drivers got to go, they got to drop and run. So I said, why don't we do this? I said, why don't we just have them drop the trailer? You unload it on third shift when your volumes are down, and they just come pick up the empty trailer in the morning and swap it with another load, and you unload it when you want to. And you thought I'd given the guy a Christmas gift. It's a huge impact on his labor.
And to you, that was like that was something that came very natural to you.
It was like breathing. It's like breathing to me. I mean, yeah, we just do that. But that's kind of the things. That's a really rudimentary example. But that's some of the things that supply chain, that distribution and logistics can do for manufacturing, to help partner with them so that they satisfy the end customer, because it should be a team effort, and a lot of times it's siloed and it's not.
Mm-hmm. Brandon, you're getting a couple questions about how, if we're a new freight broker, what's your advice for us to build relationships during COVID? You might have already said some of this, but if you're new and you're still trying to build relationships and source carriers and also shippers, and sometimes both, you have to work with the bottom feeders because you're so new.
Absolutely. So great question. COVID-19 has been very challenging, and I think we've talked about it quite a bit in depth at Metropolis and even throughout my own network and company. But it's about being different and setting yourself apart. You can build that relationship by, like I said, qualifying them. When you get them on a call, you should listen more than speak. You should find out what their pain points are, and then have a follow-up call and see if you can provide them an opportunity to not do check calls, like John said. Mm-hmm. So my advice is to make sure, when you are researching and calling, that you are doing your research and you are asking them the right questions and you are listening. That's gonna start building the relationship from day one. And then two, if you already have a customer, it's just like we touched on at the first of this call. Communicate. We talked about it last night on our little happy hour. People like John, they know we're in transportation. Bad news is going to happen. They just don't like surprises. Mm-hmm. And I think the biggest mistake that people getting into the new industry or newer getting into that aspect is they're scared to have that conversation that's bad news. And I think just being upfront, honest, and coming with a solution on top of that problem is going to build that relationship even further. So
yeah,
kind of rambled on.
It's funny that people don't want to communicate, because I feel like being a freight broker, your entire job is just putting out fires, solving things and putting out fires, solving things and putting out fires. So if you can't deal with something going wrong and you communicate it to customers, you might be in the wrong business. Yeah. Just saying. Stan, we have just a few minutes. Would you like to wrap it up for us and let us know anything you've been thinking about lately, or a hot topic on your mind, or something that's really pissing you off? You're in a safe place.
I was going to tag on to what Brandon just said.
Right.
So about doing research. So it dawned on me that a long time ago, John worked for a different company in Memphis, and they didn't ship anything out of Memphis. And you would chronically get phone calls from brokers and carriers offering him capacity in Memphis. And so I've shared that with salespeople who have worked for me. Hey, use the interweb, find out what they kind of do, know the product, and then offer something that they probably need. Not something that you need from them, but offer a solution that you anticipate that they might want, and do it in 15 seconds and get off, let them talk.
Well said. John, what is this Nashville Transportation Group? I'll let you close it out. And I think this is something you guys are building and quite passionate about. I normally don't do plugs, but I like associations.
Yes. Actually, I can't take credit for starting this one. Brandon and a couple other guys are the founding members. I was actually, when I was in Memphis, I was with the Transportation Club there for about 15 years. Was president the last two I was there. Big proponent on organizations, to your point. I've always looked at it because these organizations give back scholarships to people in logistics, supply chain, and distribution to the younger generation. So I've always looked at this as a community vehicle to give back to an industry that has taken such good care of me and my family. The National Transportation Club, and Brandon, correct me if I'm wrong, we're a little bit over a year old. We have, when I first got here to Nashville, there really wasn't an industry trade organization to network with, to kind of do like a MadGaines in the physical, if you will. And Brandon saw that need as well ahead of me. We ran into each other through a mutual contact. He's actually the president of the organization. I am the advisor. So I get to tell him, don't do this and don't do that, because we screwed it up in Memphis real bad and it was terrible. So he gets the what not to do advice, and we're growing. COVID's kind of put a little bit of damper on us, but it hasn't slowed our spirit down. We've got some huge events coming up in the fall. We do have a golf tournament coming up in the fall, and all those proceeds outside of cost will go to our scholarship fund, and hope to give a scholarship out still this year. So that's pretty impressive. I'm excited to be a part of the club. I know Brandon's excited. And honestly, I think Nashville is extremely hungry for something like this.
Yeah, good form, good spot to have it. Everybody loves Nashville. All right, guys, this was freaking awesome. Y'all are a bunch of smart people, but we're gonna continue to give Brandon shit. We're not gonna make his life easy and make him make his head too big. We gotta keep pummeling him down. For those of you out there, Metropolis, obviously Stan is new. He's gonna get on LinkedIn and he's gonna accept all the invites and the messages he's now gonna get. We're gonna drag him into Metropolis because we need people like him. John, you have a set of shippers that probably would love to pick your brain. I'm imagining after this episode. And Brandon, you're wonderful. You keep getting dragged into my financial questions too, because he's got his thumb on the pulse with analytics in our industry too. So everybody, you have your resources. That's what I'm bringing them here for you guys. So this Friday, we are going to talk about, Stan, are you ready? We are going to talk about proposed legislation to increase the insurance amounts to auto insurance for trucking companies to $2 million. Not really going to impact Stan, but I bet he's been in our industry for so long, he's going to have some thoughts. I'm going to have a top plaintiff attorney join us, and I'm going to have some insurance people join us. I am also extremely passionate about this because I've litigated across the country, handling accidents, and it is going to be a very interesting discussion. Not only the impact, because there's going to be a lot of folks who can't afford that insurance, but there's other impacts on brokers and on shippers, and with the plaintiff attorneys as well. So thank you for joining us, you guys. You're amazing. I appreciate it. And everybody at Metropolis, make sure to reach out to us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Take care, guys. Have a good rest of the week. See you Friday.